You ever notice how the world keeps telling you that being alone is something to be afraid of? They act like if you're not surrounded by people, if you're not constantly in motion, then something must be wrong. But let me tell you something. The older I get, the more I realize that solitude is not a punishment. It's a privilege most people never learn how to appreciate. See, when you're young, being alone feels like you're missing out on something. You crave noise, company, and distractions. But as you age, you start to see things differently. You begin to understand that silence isn't empty. It's full of clarity. When you live alone, you start hearing things that you never could before. Not just the creaks of your house settling at night or the distant sound of the wind moving through the trees, but something much deeper. You hear your own thoughts, uninterrupted. And that's a rare gift in a world that never stops shouting. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to tell you to shut yourself away from people or reject relationships. I'm here to talk about the benefits of living alone as an older man. Something that too many people overlook. They see it as loneliness, but what they don't understand is that there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. One is a choice, the other is a feeling. And when you embrace the first, the second loses its grip on you. The first thing you'll notice when you start living alone is a strange kind of peace settling over your life. There's no one else's expectations pressing down on you, no obligations weighing on your time. You wake up in the morning, and the day belongs to you, entirely. You move at your own pace, eat when you're hungry, rest when you're tired. There's no need to explain yourself, no need to fit into anyone else's plans. And that kind of freedom, it's something that most men don't experience until they're much older. Think about it. How many years did you spend compromising, adjusting, making sure everyone else was taken care of? Maybe it was for your family. Maybe for a spouse. Maybe just to fit into a world that expected you to be a certain way. But now, you get to decide what your life looks like. And that's not something to mourn. It's something to celebrate. And let's talk about space. A man's home is his sanctuary, but too often it ends up being a place of compromise. Shared spaces mean shared decisions, but when you live alone, every inch of your home reflects you. You decide what stays and what goes. You don't have to justify why you want a room dedicated to your hobbies, why you prefer silence over television, why you keep certain things the way they are. Your space becomes a direct extension of who you are, and there's something deeply satisfying about that. But the real magic? It's in the stillness. Because when you're alone, truly alone, you start to see yourself in a way you never have before. You're not performing for anyone. You're not adjusting your words or your actions to fit someone else's expectations. You start to understand what really matters to you. What actually brings you peace? And here's something nobody tells you. Being alone teaches you to rely on yourself. When you're younger, you might take for granted that someone else will always be there to help, to remind you to pick up the slack. But when it's just you, you learn to be responsible for yourself in ways you never were before. You fix what needs fixing. You take care of what needs taking care of. You realize that even at this stage in life, you're still more capable than the world gives you credit for. But maybe the best part about living alone is the simplicity. Life becomes clearer, more focused. You're no longer tangled up in unnecessary drama or obligations that drain you. You learn to enjoy your own company, to appreciate the small things, the quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, the satisfaction of a well-maintained home, the joy of doing things on your own terms. And you know what happens when you finally embrace this way of living. You stop feeling lonely. Because loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being disconnected from yourself. And the moment you truly understand that, you start to feel something else instead. Contentment. Now, this is just the beginning of the journey. There are more benefits to talk about, more wisdom to unpack. But let's take it one step at a time. If this is making sense to you, if something in these words is striking a chord, then you already know you're on the right path. And trust me, there's more to come. There's something about waking up in a quiet house that just feels right. No rush, no demands. No one pulling you in different directions. You stretch, take your time, and realize this is your life, your pace, your choices. And that, my friend, is something most people never get to experience. When you live alone as an older man, you begin to understand the real meaning of freedom. It's not about doing whatever you want in some reckless, careless way. No, real freedom is knowing that your time belongs to you. It's the ability to move through life without unnecessary obligations, without having to explain yourself, without feeling like you're constantly being watched or judged. It's a quiet, steady kind of independence that brings a man a deep sense of peace. You start making choices based on what actually makes sense for you, not what keeps other people happy. You eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, plan your days the way you want. Maybe you start waking up earlier just to enjoy the silence of the morning. Maybe you stay up late, lost in a book or an old movie, because there's no one around to tell you it's time for bed. It's your world, and you set the rhythm. And that's the thing about living alone. Your daily routines become something personal, something meaningful. You're not just going through the motions to keep up with someone else's schedule. You start to notice what actually makes you feel good. Maybe you take longer walks because you enjoy the fresh air. Maybe you start cooking meals you truly like, without worrying if someone else will approve. Maybe you find yourself picking up old hobbies again. Woodworking, reading, fixing up an old car. Things you set aside when life got too busy. See, a lot of men spend their younger years sacrificing little pieces of themselves for others. That's just the way life goes. You build, you provide, you compromise. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you finally find yourself living alone, you realize you can reclaim those pieces. You get to be yourself again, without interference. And let's talk about peace of mind, because one of the greatest benefits of living alone is the mental clarity it brings. When you're surrounded by noise, by people constantly coming and going, by opinions and expectations, your mind gets cluttered. You don't even realize it most of the time. But when all of that quiets down, you start to feel a difference. Your thoughts settle, your worries lighten. You start focusing on what truly matters. Stress has a way of creeping in when we're too caught up in other people's lives. Their problems become our problems. Their moods affect our moods. But when you live alone, that weight starts to lift. You're no longer carrying other people's burdens. You learn to separate what's truly yours to deal with and what isn't. And that kind of clarity, it changes everything. You begin to understand that solitude isn't about isolation. It's about self-sufficiency. You're not waiting on anyone, not relying on anyone to make you feel whole. You learn to enjoy your own company, to trust your own decisions, to appreciate the simple moments that others overlook. And you know what else happens? You stop feeling the need to impress anyone. Think about how much of life is spent proving something to someone, whether it's your boss, your family, your friends, society. You spend years trying to meet expectations, trying to be the right kind of man in the eyes of others. But when you live alone, all of that fades. You dress how you want. You spend your time the way you want. You create a life that actually makes sense to you, instead of fitting into a mold someone else designed. And here's something they don't tell you. When you stop trying to impress people, you start attracting the right kind of people. You carry yourself differently. You speak with more confidence. You become the kind of man who's at peace with himself. And that energy is something people notice. Now, I won't lie to you. There will be moments when the silence feels a little too deep. Moments when you might wonder if you made the right choice. That's normal. But let me tell you, there's a difference between missing company and needing company. And when you live alone, you get to the point where you choose your company wisely, rather than keeping people around just to fill a space. It's not about pushing people away. It's about making sure the people you do allow into your life actually add something to it. You learn to appreciate meaningful conversations over small talk, real connections over shallow interactions. You become more selective, and that's a good thing. And maybe, just maybe, you start to realize that living alone doesn't mean living without love or connection. It just means you get to decide what kind of connections truly matter. And when you do that, you start to experience relationships in a way that's healthier, more fulfilling. This is the beauty of living alone as an older man. You rediscover yourself. You regain control over your time, your thoughts, your space. You learn that solitude isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. There's something powerful about a man who stands comfortably in his own solitude. The world teaches you to believe that being alone is a weakness, that it means you've been left behind. But the truth is, a man who lives alone and thrives in it is a man who's figured something out that most never will. He's learned that peace doesn't come from other people. It comes from within. You see, when you live alone, you stop depending on others for your happiness. You no longer expect someone else to entertain you, comfort you, or fill the quiet spaces. And that right there, that's freedom. Because when your happiness isn't tied to someone else's presence, their moods, or their approval, you become unshakable. You don't need permission to feel good. You don't need validation to know your worth. And let me tell you, that kind of self-reliance is rare. Too many people never learn how to enjoy their own company. They constantly need someone around, someone to talk to, someone to distract them from themselves. But when you live alone, you face yourself fully. You learn what makes you tick, what truly matters to you, what you're actually passionate about, not what you've been told you should care about. You start filling your days with things that bring you real satisfaction. Maybe it's something as simple as tending to your garden, working on an old project, or picking up an interest you set aside years ago. Maybe you take up painting, fishing, learning a new skill. Things that aren't for anyone else's approval, but your own. You stop worrying about whether or not these things seem productive or impressive to others, and instead, you focus on what makes you feel alive. And here's the thing. When you live alone, your time is yours, to structure however you please. You can wake up early and enjoy the stillness of the morning without interruption. Or maybe you stay up late, lost in your thoughts, in the comfort of your own space. You start moving through life in a way that actually fits you, rather than adjusting to someone else's needs and expectations. And let's talk about the power of routine. See, when you live alone, you have the chance to build a routine that serves you, not one that's shaped around someone else's habits. You get to listen to your own body, follow your own rhythms. You eat what you want when you want. You exercise on your terms. You rest when it feels right. You start building a life that's truly in tune with who you are, rather than one that's dictated by compromise. And there's a clarity that comes with this kind of living, without the distractions of other people's drama, without the noise of constant social obligations. Your mind becomes sharper. You begin to see things more clearly about yourself, about life, about what really matters. You become more reflective, more thoughtful, and in that reflection, you start to appreciate the life you've built. You realize that you don't have to chase the same things you once did. You don't need to prove anything anymore. The younger version of yourself may have been caught up in status, success, or other people's opinions. But now you see that peace is the real prize. And speaking of peace, let's talk about one of the most underrated benefits of living alone. Your environment stays exactly the way you want it. No unnecessary clutter. No dealing with someone else's mess or habits that don't match yours. Your home becomes a sanctuary, a place where everything is as it should be. You're not stepping around someone else's energy, adjusting your space to accommodate another person. Everything is yours, arranged the way you like it. And that kind of control over your surroundings, it brings a sense of stability and order that a lot of people never get to experience. You also learn to be more independent in ways you might not have expected. You take care of things yourself, repairs, maintenance, planning your days. And while some might see that as extra work, what it really does is make you stronger, more capable. You're not waiting for someone else to handle things. You do it yourself. And that builds confidence, even at this stage in life. And let's not forget one of the biggest advantages of all. You choose when and how you socialize. Living alone doesn't mean cutting yourself off from people. In fact, it means the opposite. It means that when you do choose to engage with others, it's because you genuinely want to, not because you feel obligated. You start surrounding yourself with people who actually add to your life, rather than those who drain you. You learn the value of quality over quantity. You stop wasting time on shallow interactions and focus on meaningful conversations. And when you do spend time with people, you're fully present because you know that your solitude is waiting for you when you're ready to return to it. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. There are moments when the silence feels heavier than usual. There are days when you might miss the sound of another voice, the presence of someone else in the house. That's natural. But here's the difference. When you live alone by choice, those moments don't break you. They don't make you feel lost or incomplete, because you know that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. It means being in control of your own life, your own mind, your own energy. And that kind of independence, it's priceless. So, if you've been second-guessing your solitude, if you've been wondering whether this life is as fulfilling as people claim, let me tell you, it is. It's not just fulfilling, it's freeing. And as you continue down this path, you'll see that every day brings a new kind of clarity, a new kind of appreciation for the simple, quiet strength that comes with living life on your own terms. There's something about solitude that sharpens a man. It carves away the noise, the distractions, the unnecessary obligations, leaving behind only what truly matters. And when you've lived long enough, when you've given enough of yourself to the world, you start to realize that the best thing you can do for yourself is to embrace that stillness, to stop running from it, and instead settle into it like an old, comfortable chair. Living alone as an older man is not about isolation. It's about refinement. It's about cutting away the excess, keeping only the things and the people that add value to your life. It's about making peace with your own company, about learning that the silence isn't empty. It's just waiting to be filled with things that truly matter. And that's one of the greatest benefits of this life. Clarity. When you strip away the distractions, you see things for what they really are. You recognize the habits, the relationships, the obligations that no longer serve you. You begin to understand that so much of what once seemed important was just noise. And once that noise fades, you can hear yourself clearly. This kind of solitude also gives you the time and space to focus on what actually makes you feel alive. Not what society tells you should matter. Not what other people think is worthwhile. But what genuinely brings you peace and satisfaction. Maybe it's something you used to love but never had time for. Maybe it's something you've never explored before. When you live alone, you have the freedom to chase these things without interruption. And let's talk about that freedom. Because the truth is, not many people ever get to experience it the way you do. You wake up each day, and the choices are yours. The pace is yours. There's no one rushing you, no one setting expectations for how you should spend your time. You're no longer running on someone else's schedule, and that's something to be grateful for. Of course, there will be moments when the solitude feels heavy. That's the nature of being human. But what separates the men who thrive in this life from the men who struggle with it is understanding that solitude is a gift, not a sentence. You can fill your days with meaning, with purpose, with peace. You can connect with people on your own terms, without needing constant validation or company. And that's perhaps the greatest realization of all. When you live alone, you don't have to answer to anyone. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You are exactly who you are, and that is enough. You get to be fully present in your own life, in your own space, in your own decisions. There's no greater power than that. So if you ever find yourself wondering if this is the right path, if you ever catch yourself questioning whether you're truly meant to be alone, remember this. Solitude isn't about what you've lost. It's about what you've gained. Peace, clarity, self-respect, freedom. Things that most people spend their entire lives searching for. You're not missing out on anything. You're finally living the way you were always meant to. And that is a life worth embracing.